Hello and welcome to another adventure. This today is all about green careers, and I am here with Laura Downey. Hey, Laura.
Hi, Diane. So happy to be here this morning with you all and excited to have you go on another green career quest with us. We are very pleased to have partnered with USD 259, Wichita Public Schools, and the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts to offer you this exploration in the world of green careers and open those doors and windows and everything else for you to dream green for your future.
And what better way than to open doors to possibilities right here in Kansas? And we just wrapped up one on Kansas drones, and today we're going to expand our career explorations a little bit. And shall we bring on our guest speaker?
Yes, please.
All right. Hello, Dean.
Hello, how are you?
We are well. Everyone would like to introduce you to Dean Krehbiel, our state resource conservationist. All right, Dean, you're going to have to explain what that means here to everybody. But welcome, and students, if you have questions, post in the Q&A. We will be moderating that chat. So as Dean asks you questions, you can respond, or if you have questions for him, type those in and we'll be ready to pass those on to him. So that being said, we're handing it over to you, Dean.
All right. Well, thank you all so much, and what a pleasure it is to be with you all virtually. I'll introduce maybe some new topics to you all today in this green learning opportunity and careers. So again, my name is Dean Krehbiel. I am the State Resource Conservationist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or the United States Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service. We've been around for quite some time, since really about the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, so almost 100 years. The NRCS has been around working with private landowners. So who I am really is I'm a Kansas native. I grew up in Western Kansas. I actually got my career started right in Wichita, Kansas, as a soil conservation technician. I spent some time working with the students of the schools quite a while back now. But also, my main job was really to work with the farmers, ranchers, homeowners, and urban folks in Sedgwick County. From there, I took some time and spent in far western Kansas and spent some time in eastern Kansas learning more about agriculture, working with the producers or the farmers and the ranchers across the entire state. From there, I spent some time in where I currently sit in our state office, which provides technical assistance and financial instruction and other resources to our producers at the state level. So within that space in my current career, I work with the ecological sciences, our plant materials, special environmental specialists like cultural resource specialists, wildlife biologists, and other really great individuals. As far as the individual staffs that work in the state office, there's engineering and there's soils and there's financial management and a lot of other rich resource-based folks that help serve, again, our ranchers and our farmers in the state of Kansas, delivering conservation work across the state. In my career, I've had an opportunity to spend a lot of time working with those same farmers and ranchers, looking at how to address natural resource issues, water quality, water quantity, healthy soils, grasslands, forested communities, and addressing those really pivotal and important issues in the state to make sure that we have rich food and fiber, abundant food and fiber, great water quality, so we have abundant drinking water, and a whole host of other things. So my career really started in on the farm in western Kansas and grew into Wichita, and now serve the farmers and ranchers and other public interests in the state of Kansas. So my I guess my creative title that I've listed is Guardian of the Grasslands, and in the background you'll find some unique fictional information or a picture that really looks like, guardians of maybe another planet. And so today I'm going to spend some time talking about what grasslands importance are, as well as the soil that underlies grasslands and the rest of Kansas agriculture. So before I get started on that, though, I'm going to flip over to a visual. If I can get this turned on real quick. And I might ask you all what you think is going on in these pictures.
These are great images. So students in the chat, just tell us what you think is going on in these photos. And Dean, are there any hints that you can share with us?
Yes, these are not Oreos. These are something you might find as you walk out into your garden, maybe out into a crop field, something that underlies a lot of the space that we live here in Kansas with.
They're thinking pretty hard. Answers haven't come in just yet, but I know those wheels are turning. And there's definitely some movement going on in that second image.
There is. Absolutely. Something's kind of falling apart, maybe. And the other image is things are not falling apart, possibly.
One more hint, I think.
This is definitely not something you eat, but it's something that grows food.
Soil, perhaps?
You might be correct.
Tell us about it.
And
Absolutely.
Some of us have actually eaten soil as kids.
Well, I wouldn't question that. We probably eat more soil than we think. But let's take a deeper dive into what these pictures represent. So for agriculture in the state of Kansas, the corn, the wheat, the beef, the animals, all are dependent upon something that grows on and in soil. So what characterizes soil oftentimes is how we manage that soil. So we can characterize it by being maybe a healthy soil, maybe it's very stable, or maybe it's unstable because we've not taken care of the soil. So on the picture on the right is a beaker of water with soil placed on a screen at the top of the water. And you'll see it's starting to kind of fall apart or erode into the water. The picture on the left is a picture of soil, same beaker of water, maybe a different beaker of water, but in the same idea. But it's not falling apart. So the questions we might ask is, why is one falling apart and why is one not? Why is one stable? So again, if we think about the soil in the structure of our grasslands, it's not been tilled with tillage. It's not been planted on. It just grows vegetation, grass, forbs, legumes. And so typically when we see that type of a soil, like the soil on the left, it remains very stable. It absorbs water. It cleans the water. It provides root and pore space. It provides a real rich opportunity for microbes or soil biology to persist and help interact with the vegetation that grows in the soil. The picture on the right, though, tells a different story. If we think about tillage on the landscape, where we're really heavily tilling the land to grow maybe corn or soybeans, not that growing any crop is bad at all, but if we have a high level of interaction or disturbance on that soil, all the things that kept the soil on the left stable becomes unstable. So those aggregates and those pore spaces that maybe we think about in the air space that exists in a healthy soil really start to crumble and fall apart. So when we test the soil in a beaker like this, and we can do this out in the field or we can do it in a laboratory, there's a lot of science that supports this. But as we put it in the beaker of the water and it starts to fall apart, then that tells us a really good indication of the management, the history of the soil, the science of, the aggregates. Are they stable? Are they not? Will they handle a flood? Will they improve the water infiltration, clean the water? Will they provide rich and abundant food and fiber that can be produced on our land? These soils can be taken from anywhere in the state of Kansas. Again, we can compare healthy soils to soils that maybe have high level of disturbance. And we can identify what type of activities that that farmer or rancher could do to possibly improve the structure of that soil so that it is highly functional and produces rich amounts of food and fiber on the landscape.
Dean, I have a question for you.
Absolutely.
What happens when the soil is not stable and the structure is not good?
Absolutely great question. So oftentimes in crop settings, so where we've maybe planted wheat or corn or soybeans and we have an unstable soil, oftentimes we'll see erosion start to take place. And erosion is just that process where we see the soil, it starts to leave the field, it's displaced and it ends up in our water bodies or in our federal reservoirs, things of that nature. Also, what happens is because of that erosion that takes place and the lack and the runoff that takes place, we don't get the water to penetrate through the soil. That again feeds our aquifers, our drinking water supply below the surface of the soil.
And how does that impact what is going on top of the soil with maybe crops or with grasses?
Absolutely. So from a plant perspective, right? So whether it's grasses or wheat or corn or soybeans or whatever, or even in our garden, right? We think about that structure of the soil. It's really starting to collapse and fall. I guess fall in and on itself, really implode. Then the roots of those plants aren't able to grow as well as they could if it was stable. And so then we see a reduced amount of forage produced, a reduced amount of crop yield. So we see less, corn being produced or wheat being produced or vegetables being produced, simply because the roots are not able to penetrate through the soil quite as well as they could, interact with the soil biology that helps feed the plants and make them rich and healthy. So it really starts to fall apart, literally, not only from the soil structure standpoint, but also the food and fiber that's being produced from the soil on the landscape. All right. Are there any more questions that might be popping up or folks are thinking about?
I think we're good to move on.
I have one last question, sorry. And so when the soil structure is not great and the plants aren't growing well, what does that mean for the gardener, the farmer, the rancher?
Yeah, excellent. So I alluded to this briefly just moments ago, but what happens is because we don't get the yield or the full production potential because the soil is collapsed, if you will, then what that means at the end of the day is that we really don't get as much corn to the corn bin. We don't get as many tomatoes produced off that plant. We don't get as many cattle on the landscape or other types of livestock. So we see a real big impact to not only the acres that are producing that forage because of the soil that's eroded or collapsed, but that really affects the economy of the state of Kansas, maybe within your communities as well. So there's a really large cycle that is dependent upon having healthy soils on the landscape, all the way to the countries that our food and fiber helps feed across the entire world. All right, so I am going to stop sharing my screen. You can look at my face as we go through maybe some other things. All right, so next up, I've got some trivia for you all. I want to take some time and think about Kansas. I want to talk about Kansas agriculture, and I want to explore a little bit more about healthy soils as it relates to the next questions I'm going to ask. So, we talked about cropping systems and we talked about grazing lands. My first question is what percent of the state of Kansas is in grasslands? In grasslands, again, you might think about what produces livestock, beef, cattle, anything that might be growing on grasslands. And those are the ones that are not tilled, right? So we're not producing corn or wheat or soybeans, if you will. So what percent of the state of Kansas is in grasslands?
So the wheels are going to be turning here just a little bit. There might be some good debate. Well, we know it can't be 100% because we do have crops.
Correct.
And it can't be 0 because we do have areas that don't have crops growing on them as well. And it can't be, we can't miss out that some of our land has structures built on it, roads and houses and things like that. So it's got to be somewhere in the middle, right?
Somewhere in the middle. You are exactly right.
The wheels are turning here just a little bit. Give them one more nugget to chew on about this.
Okay, very good. So one more nugget to think about, right? So grasslands exist in the state of Kansas as far as to the Colorado line and certainly to the western part of the states, all the way to the eastern part where our borders align with Missouri. Also from the north side of the state in Nebraska, all the way down to our southern border, which is Oklahoma. So grasslands persist throughout the entire state of Kansas, but only a fraction of the state is represented by grasslands.
So if we're using your context clues, fraction means a small amount. So would we say 25%?
Ah, now you're getting warm. Not quite, but you're so close. Maybe a little bit more.
Well, 50 sounds a little too big.
Hmm?
So let's try 34%.
You are so close. So between 34 and 36% of the state of Kansas, so just under 40%, rounding up a bit, right, is represented by grasslands. So the next question has to do with the amount of grasslands that we have in the state of Kansas and how many livestock exist across the state of Kansas. So that's the question. How many cows, cattle, beef exist in the state of Kansas any given day? So the hint would be this would include mama cows and bulls and steers and heifers, cows that are on grasslands, also cows that end up in feeding operations. Kansas ranks 3rd in the nation for overall beef production. But again, my question is, how many cows do you think exist in the state of Kansas any given day?
Curiosity question. Is this more or less than the amount of humans in Kansas?
That is a great question. So, cattle outnumber humans in the state of Kansas.
So that tells us we've got to go with a big number here.
It's a really big number.
Maybe thinking also about the population in the state has very large numbers. In the Wichita area, we're in the surrounding areas and such, we're almost 400,000 just around here. So it's got to be higher than that.
That's
Kansas
right.
City, Kansas has several 100,000 people as well. So use that as your clues, friends, as you're coming up with an answer. It's got to be at least 500,000 or more.
Correct.
At least.
At least. And that's a small comparison to the total number of head of cattle in Kansas.
So the guess is 1.2 million.
We're getting closer. We're getting closer. Maybe a few more. Maybe quite a few more.
Quite a few more. Oh, friends.
So it won't exceed 10 million, but it's definitely more than 1.5 million. So somewhere in between.
I'm thinking that there's close to 3 million people in Kansas, so 3.5 million cattle?
You're getting oh so close. How about any given day, we might expect to see about 6 million head of cattle in the state of Kansas.
Wow.
Again, that includes mama cows, baby calves, bulls, steers, cattle that might be in feedlots across the entire state. It might include milking cows or dairy cattle. So we are rich with agricultural production in the state of Kansas. So all of those cattle end up in some capacity, feeding the world with rich, healthy protein,
That's
beef,
2 per
hamburgers.
person.
That's a lot, isn't it? Absolutely. All right. So my next trivia question for you all, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, but it still has to do with grasslands and agriculture. Super simple question, and I'm not going to give you too many clues. What is the state bird in the state of Kansas? Laura, you can't answer this quite yet, but I'll pick on you later. So it's not a goose. It's not an indigo bunting. It's not a trumpeter swan. It's not a sparrow.
They know it. It's that meadowlark.
Oh, fantastic. I knew somebody would. I was hoping that the science and the biology teachers or the earth science folks would have recognized that. That's exactly right. So the meadowlark, right? So the meadowlark is a really important bird for the state of Kansas. So it occupies a lot of space, whether it's out in cropland or out on our grasslands. It has a fantastic and really unique sound that it makes. Hopefully you all remember that from your biology lessons and your wildlife lessons. Something is happening though with the meadowlarks. They are one of the species that is in the most decline in our grasslands. So I talked about 40% of the state of Kansas is in grass, right? So meadowlarks are recognized as a keystone species within the biome that we live in. If you remember what our biome is, let's talk specifically about our grassland biome. So meadowlarks really utilize our grasslands as an important habitat type for for their life cycle, but they're in steady decline. And that's really, really challenging us as conservationists, us as biologists, us as humans that want to know and protect species and the things that are important. Our grasslands are in peril, if you will, right now in the state of Kansas. They are under threat to trees. Trees are expanding across our grasslands at unprecedented rates. We've lost millions and millions of acres of grassland, important, vital to the meadowlark, because trees are invading our grassland space. Not only do they create challenges, those trees create challenges for our meadowlarks, they also create challenges for the beef production that we just talked about. Think about if you have space, if you have 100 acres of grass, and each year you take an acre away, right? And you're trying to produce beef or you're trying to produce habitat for birds and they don't like trees. Every year that goes by, we're losing 1 acre of that landscape on that 100 acres. So that means we have less space for meadowlarks to nest in and do their thing, as well as for us to produce beef. So while we love trees and they're important across the entire globe, Kansas is known as a prairie state. As a prairie state, we refer to that as grasslands. So our native grasslands are important to not only beef production, but also our state bird, the meadowlark. Okay, well, let's shift over to another trivia question. Has to do with the first set of pictures that I showed you, soil. So if you have 1 cup of healthy soil, how many microbes might you think persist in that 1 cup of soil?
You might have to talk a little bit about what microbes are.
Okay, microbes. Think about the biology in the soil, right? What insects and invertebrates, microscopic organisms, to dung beetles and all sorts of other things that might live, worms, if you will. So that's the biology, right, of the microbes in the soil that we think about and we refer to. So let me give you some more hints. So in the biology that I'm talking about, how many microbes and how much biology exists in that 1 cup of soil? It far exceeds the number of people that we have in the state of Kansas. It far exceeds the number of cattle that we have in the state of Kansas. I'll give you a little time to think about this, but you might have to put your thinking caps on and think about really large numbers, or maybe a different way of thinking about this. How many people do we have on Earth?
Wheels are turning.
We have several billion people on the Earth, right? And that number is constantly growing.
And we're just talking 1 cup. So it might be where you put your 2 hands together in the dirt and you pull out, just fill up your hands with dirt. Soil. I'm going to make sure I say that correctly. In soil.
So dirt is what gets on your jeans when you're out playing outside on the playground or out in your garden or whatever the case is. Soil is living. It's alive with the microbes and the soil biology. It's what produces all the food and fiber that we produce out of the state of Kansas.
So we're thinking 6 million.
All right. So we're going to have to think a little bit bigger than that, but I'll give you the answer because this is a really hard one until you've had exposure or you've got the chance to really understand what soil is and all the biology that I talked about, which I didn't talk about all of it because there's so much more. 1 cup of soil, right? The amount of soil you'd hold in your hands, if you will, has more soil biology, microbes, living organisms than there are all of the people across the entire world.
That's a big thing to think about in a small little compact amount of soil.
That's exactly right. Our soil is rich with life. We oftentimes think of it as just as potting soil or a growing medium, if you will, that grows tomatoes or corn or grass. But if we take a look under the hood, so to speak, and we think about all the activity that's going on, it is rich with life. It's important with all of those microbes, all that soil biology to really produce all of the food and fiber. And by food and fiber, I mean corn and soybeans and wheat and cattle and sheep and tomatoes and all the vegetables and the fruit that we eat and that we consume, or that we're running down to Dillon's or Walmart or wherever you get your groceries at. All that food stuff that's out there is dependent upon all the soil that we have in the state of Kansas and across the globe. And just as importantly, all of the soil biology that exists, again, in 1 cup of soil, exceeding the number of people that we have on the entire earth.
So does different, let me ask this question differently. In healthy soil versus soil that's not stable and not healthy, how do you measure the difference in microbes that are there?
This is a great question. So when we work with our farmers and ranchers and we're looking at, is your soil healthy and how healthy is that soil? Maybe that'd be a better way to say that. We look at how much respiration is occurring on the soil. So we can measure the respiration in soil labs, if you will, to evaluate how much carbon dioxide, organic matter, and the respiration that's occurring with all those soil microbes. We can measure that, but it takes a really careful set of criteria and scientific methods to do that. So what we do is when we're working those farmers and ranchers, we'll take a scoop of soil, more than a cup, and we'll start to look at it and evaluate it. How dark is it in color? How many pores or how many holes do we see? Do we see any life that's moving around in those soils? And we start to count the number of different, not necessarily individuals, because again, that's billions. We can't count those. We can't see them all. We can't see most of them. But we can certainly count arthropods and worms and beetles and other insects that we can observe with our eyes. And we start thinking about those. We can measure those, again, quantitatively and assess the health of the soil. Again, a soil that is rich and healthy, we're going to see an abundant life moving in that sample of soil we're looking at. In an unhealthy soil, we may only see just a few living life forms, maybe some worms, but not too often, right? We think about that soil that's collapsed. It doesn't give room for all those microbes and arthropods and insects and worms to grow and live and interact with the soil and the roots that are going through it.
Very cool. We're just about out of time, but just a couple of other quick questions. if someone was really curious to know what it takes to be a conservationist, and if we were looking at taking classes in high school, where might that person begin?
Fantastic question. So real quickly, the agency that I work for, we are rich in scientists, right? So oftentimes we think about the science curriculum, biology, soils, maybe you want to think about zoology. Any of the plant sciences are really important to think about. While maybe we don't, maybe not all those are offered in junior high and high school, certainly as you start to think about the earth sciences, the other sciences that might be involved. There's some extracurricular activities like FFA, Future Farmers of America, or some kind of an agricultural program. 4-H is another good element that we can get plugged into as you think about what agriculture is and how to best interact with it. Those are some great tools to start you down the path of getting excited about becoming a conservationist.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Dean, for your time. Laura, I thought this was fantastic.
Amazing, Dean. And I'm going to be stuck with the billions of microbes in a cup of soil. That's amazing.
That's very
Absolutely.
big to think about. So maybe it's time for us to maybe even use our phones to use that magnifier the next time we go outside and just zoom in on a handful of soil and see what you can see.
Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. We're so grateful to have you here today.
All right, we'll
Thanks
see
so
you on the
much.
next one.
Bye.
Bye.